Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
My screen wouldn't download it's rejecting the banner.
Oh,
So here I am in my
that's
blank
okay.
screen. Yeah.
You're fine. Good. Let's take some break. There's a few things that I was trying to get it set up that weren't working out, but I had to use my iPad in the end. It was the only thing I could get to work, so I'm using that.
Great. Now streaming live, I guess.
Yeah, it's recording us.
Nice.
And all our small talk.
Yeah. It's like, surprisingly, there are nerves, which
I was more worried about missing the time just because of the time zone. So
I know.
it's like, it's a 11.5-hour difference, so it makes it really kind of wonky to try and figure it out. But I appreciate all the people that are going on listening this late in the evening. I mean, kudos to them after a long day.
That's why I got the time confused yesterday, because Lakshmi had told me it's on the 10th, but it'll be 9th for you, and I got panicked all yesterday. Not able to get in at all.
Yeah. The time, so I had to Google, and then I'm like, are they including the Eastern Standard Time? What's happening? So
no, the time, because Michelle had converted the time in our kind of like our agenda sheet, but the day was confusing.
Yeah, because they're 12 hours or 11.5 hours ahead, or if you're Eastern, then I guess it's 12.5 hours.
I'm so appreciative that then they put like the times, like 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. It's almost like difficult for me to keep up with the time zones, even though I should be able to. But,
I know,
I'm glad.
great, amazing, brilliant women with all the things that we do, but we can't calculate the time difference.
It's embarrassing. Yeah.
I think Amita is not able to join, I think, but she's having problems. Jess has responded. Let's see.
I had an issue with my pop-up blocker. I had to open it another way.
Yeah.
It was such a great team. Like, I'm so happy I'm part of this team. I love you girls.
Okay. Yeah, it's getting good already. I think we're gonna have a really great conversation. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
We're already kicking ass, right? Okay, the host says we can start the session
now. Okay.
Just a moment. Okay. So I think we have 2 more people to join, but still, since the tech host has told us to start the session, let's do it. Hi all, this is Abhirami Vivek from India, and I'm very happy to invite you all for this wonderful session. I invite all of you on behalf of Women Economic Forum 2021. So we have today here Ms. Rajeshwari Ramanan, Head of Talent Performance and DNA United Health Services, and we have Dr. Clara M. Guna, Associate Professor, MGH Institute of Professions, MGH, and we have Ms. Michelle Connolly, Quality Manager, Pfizer. So our esteemed speakers are going to talk about a very different, and a very important topic, which is how can diversity and inclusion happen from the top down. And I'm your track moderator. I'll be away with a video and audio, and I'll join you back during the end of the session. So your session is from 10 to 11, and all the best, ladies. Looking forward to hearing your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Abhirami, to kickstart the session. My name is Raji Ramanan, and I am going to have the privilege of moderating the session today. I work with a healthcare provider and been in the diversity inclusion journey with many senior leaders and C-suite the past almost 25 years in multiple countries and multiple industries. Having worked in 17 countries and coming with a diversity background myself in the Western part of the world, I feel it's a great privilege to kind of be joined by some wonderful professional colleagues of mine. It's a great panel. We have some great women leaders joining the panel. I would like for each of them to kind of introduce themselves a little bit more. And also, we want to start with the basics in terms of what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. The terminology has evolved. We started with diversity probably 4 or 5 decades ago, but then it became D&I, and now it's DEI. So why don't we go around the table? Let's start with Michelle. Michelle, I'd love to hear more about you, your background, and the definition in your mind of what is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for the introduction. So as I said, I'm Michelle Connolly. I work in quality assurance for Pfizer Global, and I've been with the company for about 13 years and had various roles prior to that. And as part of the organization, I also work on the Pfizer Global Supply Women's Mentoring Program as a co-chair, where I'm able to help really actively bring diversity, equity, inclusion into the organization and make a meaningful and impactful difference within that role. So back to the definition, when you said, it has evolved over time. And I think that it really is key to have all of those components. And to me, so the diversity part is making sure that you have, people with different backgrounds, different religion, age, sex, gender, that, what goes into that. And just ensuring that when you look around at your team, or your organization, that you don't see everybody that looks just like you, or everybody that thinks just like you, because then you're going to be stuck in only ever having a viewpoint that is just like yours, and you're losing out on the depth that comes from having the diversity. And then the next piece is that inclusion piece, which got added in, and that's the part where it's really important to make sure that, you now have this diverse talent in your organization. But what's the point of having that if you don't include them in the conversation? So I often think back, honestly, to my family. I have my father's wife is deaf, and she'll come over for our Christmas dinners, our big get-togethers. And if she's not being talked to directly to, or someone's not having a conversation with her, she's completely left out because she doesn't know what we're saying. She can't hear over all of the noise that's going on. So it's the same idea when you're doing the inclusion. You can't invite somebody to the table if you're not going to make adaptations to ensure that they're a part of that conversation. And then the equity part is that new piece that's kind of brought in, right? And we've all seen that kind of diagram where it has, 3 people trying to look over the fence, and they all have a different size box to allow all of them to see over the fence, versus when you have people who have the same size of platform, but they can't all see over the fence. I don't know if everyone knows the diagram that I'm describing, but that's what it is to me. It's really about, making sure that you're giving everybody equal opportunities. And it doesn't mean, equity isn't equal. It's making sure that they all have the same opportunities that's going to allow them to get to where they need to be in the organization so that they can contribute, the reason you brought them in the first place.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Clara, let's hear from you about yourself and what do you want to define DEI as? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and Michelle, for going into that great detail. My name is Clara Gona. I am an associate professor at the MGH Institute of Health Professions. I teach and I manage their family nurse practitioner program. So I've been in academic for the past, I want to say 15 or so years. And as somebody who teaches, and I'm of course I'm a person of color, and I'm in the US. I'm in Boston. The issue of diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion, is really something that's very important to me, because as a student, I understood what it meant to be a person of color and not be included. I understood what it's like to be in an institution where you look around and you don't see anybody who looks like you on the faculty, on the student body. And I know how it feels to be somebody who, when you open your mouth, people tend to look at who is talking. So generally, this issue has become so important to me, even though I thought I don't want to deal with it, because as you know, it's like a hot potato. Nobody wants to talk about these issues. But because of the position that I'm in, it fell into my lap. So for me, diversity means like having all like the rainbow. Like, do we have the diversity, or including everybody? Is everybody represented? That means everybody, also including diversity of thought, because we could all look the same, right? But then if we don't have diversity of thought, there isn't diversity. So that's how I define diversity. And so that includes race, age, sexuality, gender, and all those other components. Then when I think of inclusion, I think of having all these people. It's like you're playing in the sandbox, right? So you can have 10 kids playing in there in the sandbox. They can all look a different color or color of the rainbow, but if there are some who are just left sitting there and nobody's playing with them, that's not being included. That's not being inclusive. And also, how does the person, do they feel like they're part of the team? So just having them there and saying once in a while, Clara, what do you think? That's not inclusive. It means the person has to feel like people want them there. So as a leader, you have to make sure when you hire people who are different, is your team ready to have people who are different so that they can include them, so that they don't come in and some people are talking about what happened out of work and they have no idea, which is, I think, what happens in most places where we have all these people who look different, but then when we talk about what we are doing, nobody knows, nobody invites other people to their parties. So you just say, oh, there was this big party that happened. That's not being inclusive. So we have to follow through with it. And then when I think of equity, I think the idea of looking through the fence, I think the idea that you used, Michelle, I really liked. I also like the idea of, I think there's a poster going around on the internet of people plucking like that. I think they're gathering, I think they're apples or something. So they all have equal access to the tree, but then if I'm short, I might not be able to get the apple. So it means we have to make sure everybody has access. That might mean people who are short, we give them a bump up so they can have equal access to the apple. And I think most times people, when they think about these terms, they think, okay, now we have opened everything to everybody. So what else do you want? That's not what it is, because we are not all the same. We don't all have equal access until everybody can get the apple.
Very beautifully portrayed, Clara. And we have Amita just joining us. Amita, thank you so much for joining us here. Would you mind please introducing yourself and talking a little bit about what we started the conversation here with, in terms of, in your mind, what do you think is the definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Thank you, Amita.
Hi, Raji. Thank you for having me. And apologies, I was having some technical glitches which caused the delay. So very good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all of you. I'm Amita. I work for a captive of a global bank. I'm the site head for the QA practice. Apart from that, I also lead a network which works for the strengthening and support of the LGBTI plus colleagues at the workplace. Coming back to your question, so more often than not, the narrative when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion gets tangled in labels. we start paying attention too much to the labels, and that is where inadvertently it leads to compartmentalization. So what needs to be understood here is the narrative is not about the labels. The narrative is not about compartmentalization. The narrative is majorly about equal opportunities. Now, we all know what the brutal reality is. We live in an extremely unequal world. An unequal world where majority rule works. And that's how, especially when it comes to the corporate sector, which is predominantly dominated by the privileged gender, that is how the majority rule works. That is how the culture is being, formed, and that is how it's being driven. And that's where, when it comes to the lesser represented sections, various sections, we tend to discriminate. So the narrative here is creating equal opportunities for everybody and anybody. It's not about reservation, because then suddenly, there is this other discussion, meritocracy versus representation. So the narrative again is not about representation at the cost of meritocracy. We are talking about having a voice at the table, because having a voice at the table can only lead to creating equal opportunities. So that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion is for me.
Amita, you brought in some wonderful points, and I'm triggered to, respond to some of the wonderful definitions my colleagues in the panel have been talking about. I'm reminded of India implementing Panchayati Raj with 33 and 1/3% of reservations for women almost 30 years back. And I was back in India then to actually, be a part of this exercise where we trained women on assertion, time and stress management for them to be able to play the role. But 30 years later, I still see proxy leadership. The wives who have been elected members of the panchayat are sitting at home cooking and taking care of the children, when the men are actually sitting in the panchayat office playing proxy leaders. So we've got a long way to go, not just in implementing policies haphazardly or in a superfluous way. Right. And I'm really liked, Amita, what you brought about having a voice. It reminds me of this statement that one of the D&I conferences that I heard. Diversity is actually being invited to the table. Inclusion is actually having the voice, and equity is having the voice heard. Right. So there are multiple layers. Okay, you're invited to the table. Clara, you talked about that. Are you invited to the party? Yes, I'm at the party. But guess what? Nobody cares of me. Nobody comes and talks to me. What's the big point in you being invited to the party? That's actually adding insult to the injury if you just get invited and nobody cares for you, right? And there's another famous terminology, NEC. It's an acronym. It stands for nobody ever cares. So the NEC is very much related to the DEI. So you got to care. You got to have people bring their voices and also hear them, not just be hearing the voice and disregarding it. So this is great. I think we started off with a great start here, and I'd like us to move ahead with the discussion. This is very interesting. Thank you, folks. So one of the topics specifically for our panel session here is, why should diversity stop from the top? What are your views on it? Let me go with Clara first for this round.
Thank you, Raji. I think diversity should start from the top, because this is a serious topic. And this is something that we get a lot of resistance in. So if the top does not believe in it, you are not going anywhere. So the top has to say, this is the philosophy of our company or whatever organization is. This is something that's important to us. So having the top be the one that talk about it is really important, because for you to do this right, you have to also include it in your mission and vision and everything you do. So if the top is not kind of the one that's dictating what's going to happen, then it's not going to happen. But also the top can't just dictate from the top. they have to get input from the people who are experiencing it, right? So it's like the top really saying, this is the vision, this is our mission, this is where we want to go. But then the bottom saying, here are the issues that we are seeing that we should work on. So I think it's really important because this is not work. I think it hasn't worked always because it has always been, we have somebody, like I'm in academia, somebody who is interested in it, who wants everybody to be included. But then if nobody else buys in, you can't do any of that. You can't implement some of the things that need to be implemented because this is something where it has to be a shift in how everybody in the organization thinks. I think it can only be the top that kind of makes that happen.
Amita, what do you think about this? Why should it start from the top?
Absolutely. So, you know, I agree with what Clara mentioned, but then I have a slightly different take on it. I think there has to be a marriage between top-down and bottom-up approach. I'll help you understand the reasoning behind my perspective on it. So when we talk about top-down approach, I, being a speaker on various platforms, closely working as an advocate with various organizations, I see a lot of you know, measures such as leadership development training programs, sensitization, education workshops being carried out. Then there is this, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, equal employment opportunities discussions, then zero tolerance policies. Then there are various social responsibility initiatives that the organizations are taking. Then there are these recruitment and retention programs. And then also at the top level, there are these discussions of linking diversity goals, you know, diversity discussions to the business goals, and then the overall cultural shift narrative. Okay. But then what happens when we only restrict at the top-down approach? How it trickles down at the bottom is slightly different. So let me give a couple of examples. So, you know, in the top-down approach, the message is we need to create a culture of inclusiveness. When this message trickles down, the narrative slightly gets changed, you know, kind of Chinese whispers. And that's where then, especially the bottom starts thinking, including others means some of us who used to be included will now be excluded. You know, there will be this preferential kind of a treatment. There will be this reservation. There will be this, you know, kind of specialized, you know, hiring drive, which will be carried out at the cost of meritocracy. Another example could be, you know, the top-down message could be our workforce must represent the labor force and customer base. And then the bottom will start thinking it's a preferential treatment. We are, you know, practicing biases. That is where I think not only just top down, because whatever the message at the top is, when it's reaching at the bottom, because of the Chinese whispers, let's say, it's getting changed. The narrative is getting changed. That's where it has to be a marriage between the top down approach and the bottom up approach. So in the bottom up approach, the focus has to be on every single individual. So the ownership is not just at the top, the ownership is equally on everybody and anybody. So the onus of driving inclusion is on everybody. Everybody is accountable at all levels, regardless of which position you hold in the, you know, organizational hierarchy. And then that's how the community building can be formed. So by community building, I mean, these days organizations have various employee resource groups or employee affinity groups. These employee affinity groups can have people from all the hierarchies of the organization, not necessarily from the top. However, having a top kind of, you know, leadership really matters, because that's how effectively you can drive the vision forward. That's where these affinity groups can be a blend of every individual from the top to bottom hierarchy. So I think that's how this approach can be adopted and effectively driven in the organizations.
Amita, great. Top down or bottoms up, right? So let's look at what Michelle has to say.
Yeah, so I absolutely, everything that you just said is absolutely true from both the women speaking here today. And that I like the idea of like the top down and the bottom up, because what you're saying is 100% true. So to start with the top down approach, organizations need to make diversity, equity, inclusion as important as all the other measurables that they have, as their financial goals, as any of the other metrics that they're looking on a daily basis. They need to look, what is our goal? Where are our gaps? What do we need to fix? And then what are we going to do to get those goals? And then how do we align those goals from where the corporate level is at all the way down to the shop floor where the people are working, and make them meaningful goals for them. So it's not to just put a diversity, equity, and inclusion goal on somebody's performance review and say you have to meet this goal so that you somehow make the leaders of the organization look good, right? And this isn't just to have a goal set or to incorporate into your organization so you can check that box and you can be like, yep, you know, our organization has diversity and inclusion. Look, we've set it as goals and this is what we have. It's more about measuring those goals. So where are your gaps? What are your numbers? And what are you doing to change those numbers? And are you seeing a change in those numbers from the goals that you've put in place? And if you're not, then you need to relook at that and change those goals again and make sure they're working. And then on top of that, you have to have leaders believe in these goals that they're putting forward, believe in these missions, believe that, you know, having a diverse team really does make a difference. They have to want to hear from everybody on every level of the organization. And they really have to walk that walk. I think somebody mentioned earlier, it's a culture shift. So you can have all the goals and numbers in place, but if your leaders aren't exhibiting the right attitude and behaviors and setting the tone for a culture, then that's going to be a problem. And it's not easy to shift the culture organization, as any of us know. And so it's about when they walk in, you know, when you're having a meeting, any leader at any level of the organization, when you start your meetings, it could be as simple as having a conversation. If there's something difficult going on within your community, you know, maybe there was, you know, like the mass shootings that just happened, I think at one of the schools in, you know, Michigan in the US, and it's acknowledging like, how are you feeling right now? How is everybody? You know, your kids had to go to school today, or, you know, there was things in the news about the racial discrimination happening, opening the floor for that dialogue and saying like that it's not right and they're not standing for it, and that you're acknowledging that there's people in the room that are going to be impacted by that. And then, and this is where it ties in from that bottom up approach as well. I like the idea of having, as we talk about all those colleague resource groups, those CRGs, and creating these little, you know, pockets within the organization where people can feel included. They can, you know, they have like the Blacks community, they have the, you know, Asian Alliance, they'll have, you know, women's mentoring programs, or whatever those resource groups look like. And it's really important that those resource groups are driven from the top or from the bottom up, that the colleagues have a voice, and that, as it was pointed out by Amitha, that they have a leader involved that's going to help bring that voice all the way to the top so that they're heard. They're not just left on their own. Oh, great, you want to have a mentoring program? That's wonderful. Yeah, have fun, do what you want to do your little thing. No, it's not my little thing. We're going to make meaningful targets, and we want this to align with the company's goals, and we want the leadership to invest in it. So I agree with both approaches, but I definitely say that it has to start from the top. You know, our leaders are inspirational and influential, are good leaders anyways. And so a good leader should know that they have to, you know, show it. I mean, what did they say? You have to, if you can see it, you can be it, right? So if you see the diversity at the top level leadership, then you can see that you can be that. You know, if you work for an organization where it's all white men, or all men, or all one-sided, you don't see yourself in that position. But when we start seeing, you know, Black women in executive positions, then other Black women can say, I can see myself being there, right? So it really does have to start from the top, but I agree that it's a marriage between the two. So I really like the way that we've put that.
Michelle, thank you very much. And we've had some great views now, and we just have Amanda joining us, but let's start the next round with Amanda. But before that, just to comment on some of the things about where you need to start the journey. I don't think it's anything is perfect. It probably needs to be situational, and it needs to be a combination of top down, bottoms up, horizontal, vertical, diagonal. I guess if from all what I heard, that's what I'm trying to conclude this specific round with. And let's jump on to the next round. Amanda, welcome. If you could quickly introduce yourself and start our next discussion point. What are some of the challenges you are facing or have experienced in the past in the DEI journey? So thank you very much. Amanda, all over to you.
Thank you very much, Raji, and it's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. And thank you very much for including me even a little bit later than the start time. So I'm Amanda Strahan. I'm the Deputy High Commissioner at the High Commission of Canada in Delhi. And some of the challenges that I experience or have experienced in the past, I think one of the hardest challenges in this space is moving outside of our comfort zones. And we've talked, some of you have talked about your journeys with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think no matter where we are on our journeys, we all have a space in which we are most comfortable. And I think that sometimes it can be daunting to go beyond our comfortable area of action. So, for example, as a feminist, it's very comfortable for me to advocate for and defend the rights of women and girls. And although I believe strongly in inclusion across race and gender identity and sexual orientation and caste and other areas, I'm certainly less confident in my advocacy in areas where I have less personal experience. And I think that that's where allyship comes in. And I think we need to be able to accept to feel uncomfortable as we learn how to be good allies, and that's part of the progress, is being less comfortable at certain moments. Another challenge that I've experienced as a diplomat, I've worked for almost 20 years outside of my own country. And well, although we support diversity, Canada supports diversity and equity and inclusion as a universal principle. We think it applies everywhere. It's part of fundamental human rights. But the context and the perspective of how these issues are lived in different countries can vary enormously. And so every time I am in a new country and I want to continue to work to advance diversity and equity and inclusion, I need to pay close attention to learning with humility instead of judgment, and to be able to avoid overlaying a Canadian lens on another culture. It's important to understand how the issues actually play out in people's lives. And I think that applies, whether it's living and working in another country or looking to be an ally for different groups of people. I think that that's a general principle. And then finally, I think the status quo can just be difficult and tiring to fight all the time. We're now 20 months into a pandemic and people are tired. And so, people are looking, I think, want to make change, but there are times when people are just trying to get through the day, and fighting against the status quo can be really hard. And I think that's where it's important to look for partnerships, and to rely on the partnerships of other people who are working in the same direction, to sort of help to, I guess, to keep motivated, but also to sort of share each other's burdens as we continue to carry on and to fight for equality and inclusion and diversity.
Amanda, you bring a great point, being a dual citizen of Canada and the United States, and having worked in both countries, apart from other countries that I've worked with on this topic, it is amazing to learn how each country kind of views diversity and inclusion very different. The challenges, the issues are very different. I can tell you, just on both sides of the border, how diversity is viewed and how immigration is viewed. I brought in global talent in Canada. It was easily, seamlessly possible, whereas we're now trying to bring Filipino nurses here in the healthcare I work in, and it's a big task to prepare people to receive outside people, because in this part of the world we have not been blessed with a lot of immigrant population and being used to dealing with that, right? So you bring about a great point, Amanda. On the same lines, Michelle, what do you think about, what are some of the challenges given what part of the DEI journey you are in and you have experienced, Michelle?
Yeah, so I think I can resonate a little bit more with what Amanda was saying, in that I can appreciate also being from Canada that we do sort of have that different lens and perspective and just expectation that we find almost shocking when you hear things that don't align with what you would expect when you step outside of your own comfort zone, your own culture. And I really think that, again, with what Amanda was saying, I have that certain level of comfort where I know that I'm a part of the women's mentoring program. I'm really comfortable with, that sort of area, and going outside of that can be difficult. And I like what you said, Amanda, about allies, because within my journey, and that's something that we're working on strongly, and that's trying to really pull in allies within the organization. And with the current organization, they actually have like a program that's men as allies, right? And so it's really teaching men how to be allies for women, helping them with that unconscious bias that they have that they may not even be aware of, and they truly want to help, but they say, well, what do we need to do? We don't know. We don't even see the problem. So what is it that we need to do? What can we do to make a difference? And so I find myself in a similar position in that when I first started as the co-chair for this program, or actually as part of a mentee as part of our program, I had the same sort of bias within my own head. I remember being invited to be a mentee, and I thought, well, why do we need women's mentoring, right? Like, why is this a problem? Because at my particular site that I was working at, in Canada, in a small town, we had quite an equal representation. And so I, embarrassingly enough, had my head in the sand and just didn't see it as a problem. And I quickly realized that it might not have been a problem for me, but it didn't mean it wasn't a problem for other women at my site and other women within the organization, and that the problem didn't exist just because I didn't see it. So really, I'm at the part of my journey now where I've done more of the research and really recognizing where the problems are and trying to find out where I fit in and what I can do to make a difference and to make an impactful difference to the people within our organization to help reach our our diversity and equity goals.
Thank you. Clara, you've been talking a lot about, being invited to the table and not necessarily having the voice or hearing the voice, having the voice heard to begin with. What do you think about some of the challenges, in your journey?
I think I think one of the biggest challenges has been where you are included in things, but then you are the only one who is supposed to now represent all these different variations of people, right? So it has really been such a challenge. And also just being able, sometimes it's so overwhelming, being able to speak up when you should speak up, because now you are part of this group that has impressed you. So how do you start now saying some of these things that need to be talked about? For example, issues of course, inclusion, to say, just because you say you have so many students of color on campus doesn't mean we are diverse or we are inclusive enough, right? Do they have the opportunity to succeed? Don't just bring them in and then you leave it there. Bring them in and make sure they succeed, because that's why we are doing this. But then people are kind of happy to just say, oh, now we have 10 students of color in the class, so what else do you want? And then for me, having been included now, to say, wait a minute, we still need to do more. And how do you look like you represent the institution and you are a person of color, and there are these other people who are saying, but the institution is doing us wrong. How do you represent an institution that is doing this to us? And now you have joined, you have gone to the other side. So it's really, it's like a dance where you are trying to belong to both sides. And it's like, sometimes both sides don't understand what you are going through. That's one of the issues that I'm finding. And the other issue too is, it's easy in the beginning for everybody to say, oh yes, yes, this is important. But then once there is a problem, or let's say I'm in academia, so I have to talk about academics all the time. So let's say you bring in somebody of color, a faculty of color, to say, okay, we are gonna diversify our faculty. And if something happens and they leave, then they're like, oh, they don't stay, or we can't find any. Like now it's my responsibility to justify why somebody who was hired did not pan out, Or did we bring, like, did we kind of create an environment where the people that we bring in can succeed and thrive? Are we just focused on the numbers and ticking the box, like I think what Michelle said? Or have we really changed the way we think and the way the organization kind of wants to do business? I think that is the biggest challenge that I have seen, that people are, they like to see the banners, they like to see numbers, they like to hear about themselves talking about diversity, but they don't want to walk the walk, to do the difficult work that's needed to get a success, like to get really the people that we're trying to bring in to be successful. I think that is the biggest challenge that I have seen.
Clara, that's a great point. It's not about numbers. It's not about reaching superfluous targets that doesn't add any meaning to the intervention or to the individuals involved. Thank you for that. Meeta, what is your views and comments on this? Where are you in your journey and what are your challenges?
Oh, she's on mute.
Sorry, am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Apologies, I was muted.
Okay.
apologies.
Sorry about that.
So yeah, what I was saying, in continuation of what Clara just mentioned, so what I have seen is, especially organizations and leaders, they need to rise above just the FOMO. So organizations are jumping onto diversity, equity, and inclusion because of fear of missing out, but they are not making the ecosystem supportive, inclusive, towards the diversity. I mean, the recent example that we have seen is the COP2 summit, where the Israeli minister, who was wheelchair bound, couldn't attend the summit because the infrastructure wasn't really supportive of it. Imagine, it's a UN platform. It wasn't really accommodative towards disabled individuals. Same narrative is getting replicated across organizations. I mean, we are hiring diversity, but the ecosystem is not supportive enough. We are, for example, hiring women in numbers, but then if the policies, the legal framework is not supportive for these women at the workplace, they are going to quit. Similarly, organizations are running initiatives such as, second innings, or women who had taken sabbatical, giving them employment opportunities, again, to make a tick, some diversity initiative. But when you hire a woman like that, who has been on a sabbatical for a certain time, she is kind of in, out of touch with the technology changes. So when you hire that woman, you will have to ensure you create a supportive ecosystem, which can be an enabler for that woman rather than she constantly feeling left out in the crowd. Similarly, when it comes to disabled individuals. So when you hire them, is your ecosystem supportive enough towards them? Basic example is desks. Are your desks, are your ramps, are your lifts? I have seen examples where the elevator buttons, I mean, a wheelchair bound person cannot really operate those buttons in the elevator, and you do not have somebody all the time in the elevator who can help that person. That is where all this fire alarm. I mean, imagine somebody who can't hear. Do you think they'll get the sign based on the fire alarm system that we have? So all these ecosystem related changes need to be brought into place. Same for the LGBTI plus individuals. Fine, to put a tick, you will hire a gay man, but then what if that gay man is married to another man? Is your ecosystem supportive to that kind of an arrangement? Your policies, insurance policy, domestic partner benefits, everything, can it cater to those individuals? Can he proudly show his boyfriend at the workplace? So the ecosystem I don't see is very supportive at all the places. Fine, they are jumping onto the bandwagon when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they are not making the required changes in the ecosystem. Similarly, with this, another thought is the tokenism. Especially, I mean, some of you might have observed in the month of June, suddenly you will see this tsunami of rainbow colors on LinkedIn. Organizations having logos in rainbow colors and all. This is really nice. But then after June, there is this lull. So because I lead a network for my organization, and I'm also a public speaker, during the month of June, suddenly there are various engagements that come my way. But then after that, I don't see the same organizations being keen on making actual changes within their ecosystem, making their, legal framework from the equality lens, even not the equal opportunities at the workplace. They're not even paying attention to that. And then other challenge that I see is we get too much entangled in the number game, because that's how the mindset works. So for us, if we are getting numbers, that means, everything is working fine. So for example, if I am leading a network and then I see numbers. So if it's an LGBTI plus network, if 100 colleagues are coming out at the workplace, my network is successful. But that's not how it works in all the cases. It's not about numbers. Especially when it comes to coming out at the workplace, not every individual will be comfortable coming out at the workplace. That's where a success of such a network or an organization's success is not necessarily linked to this number game, So I think these are the couple of challenges that I see.
Amita, great points. I think everybody has said this. We need to go beyond numbers. We need to live the thought and walk the walk, and not just talk the walk, right? So given that, we need to focus a lot on policies. One of the things that we are still dealing with, 30 years ago was published the first ever pay equity, gender focused pay equity research studies formally. But 30 years later, we have not moved in the right direction. So that really tells us we need to work a lot on multiple aspects, including policies that are representing or that are streamlining our initiatives. Amita, you brought about a great point. How many of us would be very happy to see a gay colleague bring a gay partner? Maybe not, right? So thank you. With that, we're going to do a very quick round, a rapid fire round, because we just have probably a minute and a half. So in 30 seconds, can each one of you tell me what's the one thing you would do to change the scenario to have a better inclusive workplace? Let's start with Clara. 30 seconds. Unmute, please, Clara.
That's a tough one in 30 seconds, because really it's a whole host of things that we need to do.
Let's start
but for
the
me,
conversation.
But for me, I think just having organizational buy-in and having the leadership, really, we need leaders to buy into this. But when I mean buy-in, I don't mean just in words. I mean, we need leaders who really eat and breathe diversity and inclusion, which means this has to be an issue that's kind of being monitored, or where we need the metrics to say, okay, we are diverse. This is what we have been doing. Versus just, we are diverse. We want action. We want results. Like, what is it? How are you going to measure how diverse, equitable, and inclusive you are? We need a metric that they can use to measure it.
Live, eat, breathe, DEI. Amita, yes. What's yours?
For me, I think I will not shut up. So, whatever challenges come my way, whatever, how difficult the ecosystem is, which wants me to shut up, but I will not shut up. I'll keep on talking about it. I'll keep on actioning on it. I'll encourage everybody to bring their whole selves to work, because that way automatically it will lead to several ecosystem changes. So I will not shut up.
Thank you, Amita. Talk and action. That's Amita. Amanda.
I think we need to equip leaders. If we believe that change happens from the top down, we need to make sure that leaders who want to do this are properly equipped for the task, whatever their motivations are, right? Some people want to do it because they believe in it and they want to do it because it's the right thing. Some people want to do it because they're afraid to do the wrong thing. And some people want to do it because they're afraid of being seen to do the wrong thing. But whatever people's motivations are, we need to equip them. If people have a motivation, if leaders have a motivation to do this and to advance the cause of equity and inclusion, we need to make sure they have the tools to do it. I think that will be a driver of top-down change.
Perfect. Motivation and trained to do this better. Amanda, thank you. Michelle, last but not the least, what is the one thing you want to change?
I would say that it just kind of twofold. One is just to have the courage, as Imka said, to not shut up. So when you see something happening, you make sure that you address it as you see it happening. If someone's being talked over in a meeting, you stop and you make sure that their voice is heard, and that if they have a seat at the table, they have a voice at the table as well. So being courageous enough to step in when you need to step in, and then just being humble enough to realize that we're not always right. We don't have all the answers. We're not always doing the right thing, and everybody has unconscious bias, and just being willing to be humble enough to recognize what those are and to continue to learn it and see those blind spots so that you can continuously improve it and try to make a difference where you can.
Michelle, thank you. So we're going to conclude saying we are going to fight this, and fight this with no end in mind, infinite fight towards making a difference and making things go beyond compliance and beyond just the talk, more of walking the talk and action. Great session, my dear panel members. I think we got this. We're going to go out and do it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
We need to
you.
move.
Thank you so much. Can I just have, okay, I think they've left.
Abhirami, I'm there. Do you need anything?
No, I just wanted to announce the awards for all the participants. So that was a real power pack session, and Mastaji, it was really wonderful, like you took over the session, and the flow was very, very nice, and there were a lot of insights for all of us. And thank you so much. On this occasion, I would like to announce that Women Economic Forum is happy to announce that all the panelists today are awarded as Exceptional Leader of Excellence, and the e-certificate will be mailed to each one of you within a fortnight. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abhirami. I think you did a great job, and it's a privilege participating. See you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.